Watch thousands of exclusive shoot interviews right now on TitleMatchNetwork.com.
Today we are here with none other than Bret the Hitman Hart. He has basically done everything in the world of professional wrestling. Definitely one of the greatest performers in the business. You've accomplished almost everything, in my opinion. You've held every belt in the World Wrestling Federation. U.S. champion in WCW, and of course WCW heavyweight champion. And you're a legend around here in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. And our first question we'd like to ask you is how you got started in the wrestling business.
Well, like when I was a kid, you mean?
Yeah, as far as like when you were in high school. What was it like growing up in a family?
Well, I mean, I grew up, first thing I did was sell programs. I mean, I remember the very first time I went to the wrestling matches. It's funny how it really never changed that much as a kid until I got into it. It was always pretty much the same thing. I watched wrestling. I was finished on the programs. I'd watch wrestling from the first match on after that. I'd watch all of them. I pretty much, not realizing, I think I studied wrestling.
Right.
Kind of like what you did, really. And then as I got older, I got into, of course, amateur wrestling. It was like high school wrestling champion. I always knew there was a big difference between the two. Wasn't sure what the extremities of them, what the comparisons between the two. All I knew is it was you had to fiercely defend it, kind of thing. And then when I really got into wrestling was following that amateur wrestling career through to college. I really wanted to kind of jump off. I wanted to get off of it because it really, in a lot of ways, the amateur wrestling, I won the college championships in whatever year that was. And it really messed up my school. Like I did well in wrestling, but
right.
My grades suffered for it. And so and they were starting to sort of see this, you started getting my dad all worked up about me going to the Commonwealth Games and stuff like that. I don't really believe I could have won or anything, but there was guys that really wanted to push me to try to go, and you just never know. Maybe because I was good. I just don't know if I was dedicated enough. And I started to reason that I had to find a way to get out of this amateur wrestling because I didn't like the future of it. I didn't want to be a old, worn-out phys ed teacher or amateur wrestling coach, like whatever it is that they do after their careers. And I thought, well, pro wrestling. It's funny how your logic, especially as a kid, but I thought pro wrestling means you're a paid professional, and it would ruin my, like I could be an amateur after that. I couldn't go to the Olympics or whatever it is. And so I had different guys talk to me about getting into pro wrestling. I never really had any desire to do it from the time I was about 16 until I was about 19. And I started thinking about it a little bit. And I remember I got smartened up driving to a town to be a referee. They convinced me that I could referee.
Right.
Some little town, Red Deer, and they kind of smartened me up in the van driving up. Which they didn't tell me anything I didn't already know, but it's like I officially have been smartened up.
Right.
And I refereed. It was just like amateur wrestling referee, like you just pretty much common sense. And I applied the same thought into what it took to be an amateur referee, into a professional wrestling referee. And so I only refereed a little here and a little there, and then I started doing like Monday, Tuesdays, and then Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, just the short trips, and that was fine by me. It was a little extra money, that kind of thing. And it was always guys that were talking about teaching me how to get into wrestling, to break me in. And more often than not, they never showed up, which was fine by me. I was like more inclined to sleep in and stuff like that anyway.
Right.
But there was 2 Japanese wrestlers that have been kicked out of the States because their papers expired or something like that. And my dad took them in up here, and actually pretty good. They were really good workers for that era. And they started talking to me about teaching me. And I thought, it wouldn't be a bad idea to learn this pro wrestling. And I thought, at that time, maybe it'd be a good idea to take a little break from the school and from everything, travel around a little bit and see the world a little bit before I...
Did you go down to Dory Funk Juniors?
I went down to see him, yeah. Right. Well, I went down to Amarillo every summer from the time I was grade 9, grade 10, grade 11, grade 12, and spent a lot of time with all the Funks.
Right.
I knew the family really well. The last time I went was pretty much the same year that I got into pro wrestling. I remember I had a couple of job matches. So, I actually did work the Amarillo territory, if that means anything. I think I worked with...
One of the guys is Dennis Stamp.
Dennis Stamp, yeah. Who was a really good worker at that time who really looked out for me because I couldn't even tie up with anybody. And pretty good match with him. But I remember I worked with a guy named Pogo,
Right.
who was a Japanese guy. He stiffed the hell out of me, chopped me, beat the crap out of me, really stiffed the shit out of me. And I didn't think I knew any better, but I knew that like he was taking liberties.
Right.
And he's, I've always wanted to run into him again, kind of thing. But I was just learning. And then they started teaching me pro wrestling. I learned it for December, January, February, about 4 months. I learned pretty detailed stuff. I mostly learned how to fall over and over and over and over and over, which I think has given me my longevity. I don't think anybody wrestled as hard as me, and it's kind of, with the exception of my concussion, been able to walk away from it with their body parts still work, most of them.
Right.
I think a lot of that had to do with how I learned to fall, how I learned to break my fall. Even in college, I took a police science class, which was all how to learn how to break your fall with self-defense, which came around the exact same time, and that with the amateur wrestling. So when I just kind of fell into it, and I think I was quite good right off the bat. I think I was better than both my brothers who were working at the time, or at least had more natural, raw ability, and I was going to be bigger than both of them. Keith was a good worker, and Bruce was so-so, but Keith was a good worker, and I think I learned off kind of a little bit of my brothers and whatnot, but and I sort of reasoned that whatever they could do, I could do. I remember my dad had booked my two older brothers, Smith and Bruce, to Puerto Rico,
Right.
To go wrestle B. Hart and S. Hart, and they'd sent airplane tickets up or something like that. And my brother Bruce balked at the last minute, didn't want to go.
Right.
And it was just like that. I mean, it was so sudden. All of a sudden, I was on an airplane flying to Puerto Rico. I did have a couple of matches, Stampede matches. I had maybe 2 weeks worth, 3 weeks worth. None of them were ones I wanted to have. Like, I was like, they were short a guy kind of thing.
Right.
And I was just the referee, which means the fans. I wanted to leave and come back in a year or two, and hopefully they forget me as this sort of, because referees always had so much heat on them in those days. But I showed up. I had a couple of matches. Most of them were with sort of old guys and guys that just, some of them were babyface matches and stuff like that. I did remember wrestling the Dynamite Kid.
Right.
And he potatoed the hell out of me. And there was a sort of a bit of an attitude with him and me right off the bat in those days. We became friends after that, but in the beginning where there was a real, not for me either. I was walking into it without knowing that he was just kind of like that. Anyway, so I did have a couple of matches under my belt, but nothing to really call me a professional.
You worked Georgia territory a little bit too, right?
Yeah, that came a little later on. I went to Puerto Rico, wrestled there for a couple of months, dropped about 100 pounds or whatever, and got sick and beat up and starved and whatever else they had down there. Fled that place, with relief, and got home for my 20th birthday or something like that. And then I took the summer off. That's where I did go to Amarillo, wrestle a little bit in Texas for 2 or 3 shows or something like that. Came home, started for my dad in September, and I've been going ever since. I think that was probably about 1978 maybe.
Right. What are some of your memories of going to Japan and wrestling the original Tiger Mask?
I remember the drop kick he gave me in Sapporo. I think it's funny. I was writing a list of concussions that they wanted a detailed account of anything I can remember as being a concussion, and I'd have to say that was pretty close to one. He hit me with a drop kick off the top rope that almost killed me. I don't know how I got back to the dressing room. But all in all, he was a hard worker, and I think he was a big time innovator. Like, he changed the whole course of the business. I think him and Dynamite both did. I enjoyed working with him. He was a very skilled, really good wrestler. The thing about him was, for me, I was never really a junior heavyweight, but that's kind of the only offering I had at the time in Japan.
That was one of my questions. Was the style hard to adjust to over there?
Yeah, all of it was hard. Japan was always tough for me. I was too much of a worker, to be honest.
Right.
I never I mean, I did okay in the end once I realized that's how it works over there. You got to struggle for it and fight for it. I always just reasoned that it was easier to work a match. In those days, there was always a pecking order when you went to Japan. So if like 8 guys were on a tour, whoever was the bottom of the pile, they never sold for them. And I think the very first time I went, it was a little bit like that. I found myself having to literally fight through every match. And they used to work the matches out. They'd always they'd have the cue on when they could go home.
Right.
They'd set it up that way. I learned quickly that you can't let them do that because they'd totally blow you up. And as soon as they blow you up, you'd still go another 5-10 minutes where they just basically, you couldn't even get your hands up to defend yourself. And it's like they just take such advantage of you. And the funny thing about all those guys was just the young guys or the middle guys. Inoki, Fujinami, Tiger Mask, all those guys were great workers. Ricky Choshu, when they wanted to work with you, they could all work with you. But in those days, I wasn't working with those guys. So Japan was always tough. Usually if I was there for 6 weeks, the last 3 weeks were my better matches. First 3 weeks, it was hand-to-hand combat kind of thing. And I never really enjoyed it. I always lost weight.
Right.
Japan was hard. I always think of it as the pro wrestling Olympics. You really had to go and fight for your right to fame and fortune kind of thing.
Then you wound up back in the States? Or?
I worked 6 different tours in Japan. Japan, I worked Stampede Wrestling and had some really unbelievable matches with Dynamite. I think I brought out a lot in Dynamite too. I don't think, Tiger Mask is a different style match and it was great. Dynamite had some really great matches with Fujinami. And he had some great matches with Nelson Royal and different guys. But some of the matches I had with Dynamite, I'd say were better than all those guys put together. I had the very first ladder match with Dynamite. I basically brought the ladder matches to the WWF just so everyone knows that was a stolen sort of idea.
Right.
Dynamite may have the most unbelievable ladder match. It was always with a lot of color and all that kind of stuff. But they were so unbelievable. One guy, for example, Adrian Street, I don't know if you know him.
Yeah.
He still to this day talks about the one ladder match I had was like the most unbelievable match. And it's true. It's always stood out in my mind as one of my absolute best matches. And it was all based on reality. Like, it was so real in those days, the wrestling matches. And the ladder match I had with Dynamite, I just remember it was that same old finish where he drop kicked the ladder and he took an unbelievable bump over the top rope. Cement floors in those days.
Right.
And I remember scrambling up, but I remember the ladder fell on the rope and then fell back, and I had to roll out of the way. It almost killed me. It was pretty dangerous stuff, and it missed me by about this much. But the excitement of it all was like, if you were watching it, the suspense, because everyone could see the ladder falling on, and so I had some really good matches Stampede Wrestling with Dynamite.
Some of your matches with Bad News?
Nah, I never thought they were any good at all. Bad News, unfortunately, he had a bad psychology. His psychology was to eat you up, cut you off in the middle of your comeback, and see how that drew the next week.
Right.
It was like, geez, he had a lot of trouble understanding that it was a work, and that up here there was a limited amount of stars that they could push. He had the same problem, I think, with my brother Owen. The fact that it wasn't so much Owen wanting to be a big star and me wanting to be a big star. We were the only stars we had, and you had to look out for the stars you had. Bad News never saw it. He had a fucked up Japan. I remember when I first met him, he wouldn't take an arm drag. And near the end of his career, he was nothing but a guy taking silly bumps.
Right.
But in the beginning, he was pretty tough to work with. He didn't sell anything.
Do you remember when Owen first came to you and wanted to be a wrestler? Did you encourage him, or did you?
Yeah, big time.
Okay.
He never really came to me. When Owen came to me was, I was with the Hart Foundation. We were starting to, probably still in the blue tights.
Right.
We were starting to go a little somewhere, starting to have a little fun. I was making, from by my dad's standards here, I was making some pretty good money. And I remember, I did have this feeling that it would run out any minute.
Right.
I always had that feeling. But I remember telling Owen, it's like, I don't know how long this is going to last, but if I was you, get out of the school, whatever it is you're doing, you can always go back and do it because we got maybe 8, 9, 10 months. You could always join me in gym and get in on this thing while you can. And I remember Owen actually considering it quite strongly. I remember Martha kind of mocked him for it. And, yeah, right, Owen, be a wrestler. It was kind of she didn't take it serious at all. And a week later or 2 weeks later, he was working Stampede Wrestling for my dad's, which had reopened right around the same time. And I think it was a good move for him, and I think he was always glad he did it. As a matter of fact, I know he was. I know they both were. I think wrestling turned out to be, for both of us, I think, did a lot of things for us and opened up a lot of doors for us. And, despite whatever has happened in the business, I think we've always been really grateful for what it brought, what the business gave us anyway.
Right. I guess in 1984, your father sold Stampede over to Vince. And part of the deal was, I guess, you, your brother, and Dynamite went over to World Wrestling Federation. What were some of your initial impressions when you first got over there, as far as your initial impressions of Vince?
Well, it was an unconditional part of the deal. It was never like, it was never like in the fine print or anything like that. We were invited along as like, pat on the back kind of stuff, but there was no promises or guarantees on anything. Dynamite, as a matter of fact, we'd showed up and did TVs, Dynamite and me. We did Brantford, Poughkeepsie TVs or something, Hamilton, I think is what it was. And they paid us $75 and $50. He quit. He wouldn't even talk to him for 4 or 5. He said, the hell with them.
Right.
And, of course, I was limited. I didn't have Japan. I didn't have as much. I had it, but not real secure anyway. And I'd had knee surgery. So I hung on and kind of checked, wrote it out. And they did tell me, that's just TV. Don't worry, it's not gonna, but you really think about it, paying somebody $50 for TV is not much, especially when you looked at both Dynamite and me. We spent more than that on just our expenses at hotel and food, like triple that, and we were budgeted. And like I said, we didn't make a lot of money in those days. So Dynamite was rightly offended. I went to Japan. I did my last trip to Japan, hoping that I had some kind of security there, and went into the WWF almost the day I landed from Japan. Not sure what could happen. Right. Not expecting much. If anything, a lot of the guys that I was with in Japan kind of reasoned with me that, because George Scott, who was Vince's guy in those days, had told me, don't worry, we got big plans for you. All you guys. They were still kind of talking about Neidhart, Owen, Davey, and myself. My brother Bruce was supposed to move into the management. I don't know what happened there with him, but all I know is I ended up there all by myself when I watched the New York guys, as they were called in those days.
Right.
We used to laugh a little bit about it because they were famous in Stampede territory. It was I can remember Dick Murdoch when we were over in Japan or Arabia or whatever and stuff like that. He always talked about working New York style. He'd stand on their apron and stomp his feet and stuff like that.
Right.
He wouldn't do that. Was considered New York style. So a lot of people made jest of New York style. But
one of my questions was actually, were a lot of guys intimidated by you guys when you guys came in as far as your athletic ability compared to the work rate that they
not with me. I was such a small, when I came in, I was doing jobs for Vinny and Goulet and stuff like that.
Right.
Gonna get this big push. But I did get my first check, and I think I made like a couple of grand anyway, American. And it was a big change from what I was making working for my dad. So it does revert back to that the little fish, big pond, and big fish, big little pond kind of mentality. I figured I'd have to just suffer through it. Then as I watched everyone work, I thought I can, I'm just going to dig in here, just keep, I often, you talked about my first meeting with Vince, was in Hamilton, same time me and Dynamite had tagged. He stressed to me that he wanted his boys to work out. He wanted all of us to work out. Of course, I could barely walk in the ring. I had just had knee surgery. That was before I went to Japan when we actually had that match. And I kind of had a really bad audition first time.
Right.
And I didn't do well, and I'd been off, and I didn't expect to do well. It was kind of like hoping that I wouldn't even have to wrestle. That was kind of like the last look they ever gave me for a long time. They made their judgment, passed their judgment on me that I was not a good worker and not worth spending a lot of time or effort on. And they loved Dynamite, which he was working really good then. and they hadn't even seen Davey, but they knew enough about the two of them. But they were going to Japan, so that they were kind of out of the equation. So I ended up there all by myself. And after I did go to Japan, I started for him, and I got to know Cowboy Bob Orton, who did a lot for me in those days. Brian Blair, some of those guys.
Right.
And I just kind of did the circuit, you know. They didn't have any big push or anything like that. And, I, you know, of course, thought it was all going to run out of gas. And you know, especially WrestleMania XI, they were talking about if it wasn't a success, they'd lose everything. And then it turned out it was a big success,
right.
you know. And right around that time is when Neidhart had actually come in February. That was in that time when they were going to call me Cowboy Bret Hart.
Right,
I ever told you that story, but George Scott came up and had me come up to his room. He said, "I've got a hell of a gimmick for you, Cowboy Bret Hart, you know, like the Electric Horseman, a horse that lights up and white hat with light bulbs on it or something." And he got me all excited. They're gonna have an action figure and the horse, and like this is gonna be. We have a different horse in every building. I remember I left. I was trying to get excited about it, and I remember knocking on his door about 2 a.m. I said, "Josh, I want to be a cowboy." I said, this was in light of where Kirshner was going. Right. He was in, and he was becoming a big name, and had the little toy and all that shit. And I think it was a pretty gutsy call at that time. I said, I don't want to be a cowboy. I can't ride a horse. I hate cowboy boots. I hate country music. I can't do it.
Right.
I could never make it right, especially where I come from here. They got too many real cowboys here. And I remember he told me, he says, "This is a hell of a thing. You're going to miss it. We'll give it to somebody else." I said, "Well, you have to give it to somebody else."
Right.
And I did run by the idea of tagging me up with Neidhart, calling us the Hart Foundation. He's managed by Jimmy Hart. And this before I ever spoke to Jim about it. And he told me, he says, "You could never work heel. You never be a heel. You don't have the face. You don't have the..." And so I went through my downward spiral until I actually was getting ready to quit. It was about maybe 2 weeks before WrestleMania.
Right.
And they just kept leaving me off TV. And I called up to basically give my notice. Because I was, not that I was going to quit and go home kind of thing. I think I was going to try to regroup and come back at another time and just keep digging in somewhere else.
Right.
I didn't want to blow the big opportunity in New York. And I thought I'd leave with some kind of reputation and come back later. And that's when he said to me, he goes, "We're going to turn you heel with Neidhart." And so right after WrestleMania XI, I just walked out and I was started as a heel. And that was my breakthrough to a certain degree. And I think I patterned a lot of my character traits off Dynamite, I think, a little bit.
Right. He
was not using them. He had no intentions of going there. And I finally took me out of that passenger seat thing where I didn't have to go along with what Goulet wanted to do, and the spoiler and all these guys that were such shitty workers or didn't want to do shit with me anyway. I remember Rene Goulet wouldn't even take a drop kick from me. They just wouldn't do anything for you. So Tiger Chung Lee. I mean, every night I'd come back and Terry Gibbs having me in a bear hug like this.
I was actually at some of the Spectrum shows with you before.
I liked all those guys, but I mean, I just wasn't. They want to have a nice, easy match with a nice. They didn't want to do anything for me.
Right.
And I couldn't get any emotion going. They couldn't get any heat up on me. And so when they turned me heel, actually, I remember the last time I worked with Terry Gibbs, he came back and threw his boots against the wall. Said something about I'd never learned to work. Said it in front of Neidhart without Neidhart knowing we were related. And I thought, I'm going to show these guys what it's like. If I was a heel, if I could work with me.
Right.
And that was the whole thing for me. I became a really good heel right off the bat. I worked really hard, and I got a lot of heat up on my. I really enjoyed those matches that we had with the Bulldogs.
I was going to ask you about that. What are some of your memories?
Most of them are really good. Some of the cage matches that we had, there was a lot of blood and all that kind of stuff too. But they were so heavy, so realistic. I mean, I look at that wrestling in those days and the intensity. That was like pro wrestling maybe at its most artistic. That's like Taxi Driver movie.
Right.
Like it was like really mind-blowing kind of performances by Dynamite. Even Davey was really good in those days. And Neidhart was really good. You know, we were, there was blood in these, like we were getting juice in these matches all over the country until we found out that Orndorff and JYD were doing this like real ponderous kind of match with the main event, even though they weren't on last. They were making all the main event money. We were making, you know, secondary money. And then I think we realized that had been shafted a little bit. We were working so hard. You know, our heads looked like, you know, cheese grater kind of stuff. So that was kind of a disappointing time to a certain degree. But we really had some unbelievable matches artistically. Even the Killer Bees, we had good matches. You know, you look at those teams. Killer Bees were good workers. You know, they really worked hard, and it was a work. Like it was a total work. Even the Rougeau brothers were, you know, the Jock used to do some of that phony stuff. We used to do twirl, somersault up your back and stuff. You know, but most of the time, Ray was pretty solid. And the matches were pretty solid, and in those days, guys were really safe.
That's okay.
Guys were pretty professional.
Well, who were some of the locker room leaders as far as those days? Was it Hogan and was it Piper? Or?
Well, they talk about cliques and stuff. There's always been cliques. I engulfed myself with guys like Adrian, Orton, Morocco, Fuji, Piper, of course. And there was a lot of guys that sort of kind of everyone really got along. The thing about wrestling in those days was Hogan was the big, sort of the king.
Right.
But everybody liked Hogan. There was never anybody going, geez, we got to get rid of this guy. You know, he's really, I think everybody loved him. He was good to everybody in the dressing room. He was really respected. Places were packed every night. There was no politics. No one was going, we got to get Hogan out of here. Like Junkyard Dog or Randy Savage or Bundy, or I mean, the heels were all, they fed Hogan one heel after another, which he was so fortunate to have. He had the best array of heels that have ever been assembled in the history of the business, lined up one after another, from One Man Gang to Killer Khan, all these guys, Kamala, and he drew nothing but money. But everyone was happy. Everyone was making money. It was a total work. There was girls everywhere. You know, every place, the hotel bars, and it was a lot of fun in those days. You know, and you had to be careful. The temptations of the road life didn't bring you down, but you know, it was a good time in the wrestling business.
What are some of your memories of your matches with Ricky Steamboat? You recently talked.
I only worked with him twice. I had an awesome match with him in Boston Garden, which I think is on tape somewhere. That was a first-time match. Never worked with each other before. They just finished telling me before the match started, I was supposed to work with him at WrestleMania, and I was really excited about that. And at the last minute that night, I found out they changed it. I'm not working with Ricky Steamboat. It's going to be Hercules Hernandez, and I'm going to be in the Battle Royal now. And I was so disappointed. I was so mad in the dressing room. Like, heartbroken is a better word, I guess. Like, just ruined my day. And I think Ricky was aware of it, and he felt bad. You know, I think for me, because he realized I really wanted to work with him. It wasn't a question of putting him over or anything. I just really wanted to work with him. And when we sat down for that match, we kind of mapped it out, and it was more Ricky, I think, than me. But he really went overboard trying to give me a really great match. And we went in there. We had a really good match. I think we messed up one little spot, which was nothing. You can't even notice it. But I remember I worked with him the next night in Washington. We had even a better match, which was never filmed. It was on the big wall or clock or whatever it is in those days. But both really, really good matches. He was one of the easiest guys I ever worked with, and one of the most professional guys to ever work with. I loved his psychology. He had a great psychology, and he was like, anytime you walked in a dressing room and you looked on the sheet and you saw Ricky Steamboat's name, I don't know who like every wrestler there is would be thrilled to see that. Like, that he's one of the best guys you could ever work with.
Actually, what are your memories of the 1987 tag match, I guess, with the Bulldogs? I guess they wanted Dynamite and Davey to lose the belts to Sheik and Volkov, and I guess it's rumored that Dynamite only would drop the belts to you and Jim.
Yeah, that's true. That is true. They asked him to drop them to Sheik and Volkov, and he flat out refused and said, as I remember it, that only one team deserved it.
Right.
And he said that it was only guys he dropped to was us, and for the simple fact that we deserved it, that we were the hardest working team in the territory. I remember that was around the same time we wore the pink.
Right, it was 87, I think.
Yeah, it had a lot to do with, I think they were right around the exact same time, maybe within a week of each other or same. But I know we walked in, I'm pretty sure it was San Diego, California. It might have been for a Saturday night main event. And it might have been for the Bees. I remember we were putting them over or something like that. And we'd wrestled in Calgary, funny enough, the night before. First time I ever wore pink was in Calgary, and we'd had a cage match with blood everywhere. I remember washing my gear, and we went straight from there to California. And we did wrestle on the Saturday night main event, but I remember walked into the cafeteria. Vince McMahon saw the pink tights,
right,
and he just about fell off his chair. He walked around us about 3 or 4 times. He was just like, couldn't believe it. He says, "I can't believe it. Don't change. This is what you guys have been missing all along.
Right.
From this point on, you guys wear pink every night. Don't change anything. This is your new look." And also, right around that same time is when Dynamite kind of went to bat for us and said that we should get the belts. And you know what? Being fair, I think we should have got the belts. There was no question we were the best heel team in the territory at that time. And then he got hurt.
Right.
And he did get hurt. And Neidhart, slapped around a stewardess or something like that.
Right.
It was like everything fell apart, and Dynamite was, man enough to. And good enough, and showed a lot of, courage or whatever to pull himself, fly all the way down there and do that for us. Right. You look at the guys in the business today that would have done that, Shawn and these different guys. Nobody would do that kind of stuff. And look where he is today, like on account of it. So I've always been grateful for what Dynamite did.
Right. What led to your singles push? I guess coming out of WrestleMania.
The world is full of lies. I don't know. It's funny because that I think was my first big lie that they told me. Well, maybe the big lie was there's so many different lies with the WWF. I think it was a constant, and it's not so much. I guess kind of like I never expected it to be easy. So maybe I always had a way of dealing with it and sort of being patient. But Vince McMahon called me up before WrestleMania XIII. Or just before WrestleMania 4.
Right.
Atlantic City or whatever. And I could sense something was up because we didn't have to make the TVs before the WrestleMania. And he called me up on the phone to tell me that, and this is an exact quote, he said, "We have more fan letters for you than any other wrestler in the territory. Like any other, there's nobody that has more fan. They can't figure it out." Remember Vince laughing, going, "I can't figure it out." There's more fan letters. Now, I always think there's no way I had to have more fan letters than Hogan. But I will go by what Vince says. Vince did say that I had more fan letters than any single wrestler in the entire company as a heel. And that he was going to give me this big push and turn me babyface, break me up from the team. They weren't sure what they'd do with Jim. Of course, I wasn't really looking forward to be a heel or a babyface, but I was so happy being a heel. But I also saw this was like the big opportunity. Right. The dolls, the merchandise, all that kind of stuff. So of course I bit into it hook, line, and sinker, and immediately did jobs for Bad News Brown after that for the next. That was my big push. And I was still over, because they were getting Bad News ready for Hogan, and we had decent enough matches. I don't think I lost too much. My credibility or anything by doing that for news, and it wasn't so much putting anybody over. It was just like they'd been promised me like this kind of break was like would have been a big thing for me. And then they threw us in with I think Honky and Valentine or something like that. We just sort of moved around. Went from tag to single to tag.
You worked a couple of programs with the Rockers too, I think.
Yeah, that came much later on.
Later.
Yeah. We mostly kind of just went, we worked with Demolition. We had some good matches with Demolition. Right. As baby faces. Probably the best ones as baby faces in those days. And I guess, you know what it was? I remember telling Jim that it's a bit like a cycle. I said, we got to go all the way around again. Right. And we just got to outwork everybody again. So, every night we're still getting a decent pop and getting good reactions and stuff. And I think the business was healthier in a lot of ways in those days. That we just sort of survived that sort of. A lot of guys can let that break you.
Right.
We survived and came all the way around again, and just in time to sort of outwork everybody again. I mean, I don't think we ever had them handed to us for any kind of political reason. We got them strictly because we worked hard. We outworked everybody. Jim was a character. When the time came, those tag team matches, we had all the pay-per-views anyway. We had awesome tag team matches. And, the psychology, we had really good tag team psychology. I take all of the credit for all of that. But the Demolition were great. They were good workers. Bill Eadie was an awesome worker. And they really, once they worked with us, same with the Bulldogs and the Demolition. There became such a respect and an admiration for each other. That you really it was a lot of fun working with them every night. If we could have wrestled each other for 3 years, it would have been better. And the same thing, they willingly dropped the belts to us. They saw it as we'd earned it. Right. It was time for them to pass them off to somebody, and we were the right guys. And as soon as we got the belts, I don't think we had the belts a month. When they pulled, I remember me and Jim just did our first pictorial for the magazine with the Hart Foundation tank top, the limited edition.
Right.
That might still be out there. It was one of my favorite WWF t-shirts anyway. We were all excited about the t-shirt shoot. And then they told us Vince wanted to have a meeting with us. And I remember he came in and he said, I'll talk to you one at a time, and I'll take Jim first. And I didn't know what to expect. I had no idea. I didn't know what was going on. We just got the belts, and we were working pretty hard. And I kept trying to think of what could we have done wrong.
Right.
And I remember Jim came out. He looked very. You could tell it was like a mix. He didn't. I knew something was up. He came out with kind of like. His eyes kind of told me that something's up, but I can't tell if it's good news or bad news yet. And then when I walked in, and he goes, "We're going to take the belts off you. He goes, you know how we've been promising you the real push, the big push. He pulled that rug out on me. I don't know how many times. He goes, this is the real one. You're going to work with all the top guys. You're going to be in all the main event matches. You're going to make all the big money.
What year is this around?
88 maybe,
okay.
89. We won the belts SummerSlam 89, I think, or 90, I think.
Right.
And this would be about a month later. So anyway, he goes, we're breaking you up, taking the belts off. You have them drop into the rockers, and we're going to give you this big push in singles. And so I asked about Jim again, and he said that they weren't sure what they're going to do with Jim, but they might use him as an announcer or something like that. So I remember I came out. It was kind of those bittersweet things because Jim had been a really good partner to me, but at the same time, this was a real big break.
Right.
And I don't have any control over where they pull us. And you can't resist their ideas. Like if I said, look, I want to stay with Jim, all I'd be doing is burying myself.
Right.
Blowing a big opportunity, because then they would
find things better.
Yeah, they're just ruining you for disagreeing with them. And it was a good break for me. So, and Jim wasn't necessarily out of it either. It was to see what happens. So we did that farce match up in Indiana somewhere, Fort Wayne, Indiana,
right.
with the Rockers. And it was kind of a pathetic situation. The top rope broke. Right. I sometimes think Jim did it on purpose with a front turnbuckle. Jim wasn't happy with the direction. Right. This didn't offer a whole lot for him. And he took a front turnbuckle and broke the turnbuckle corner. And we had this awful referee. Other than that night when he failed miserably and let everybody down, Freddie somebody from Boston.
I don't know.
Freddie. Anyway, I can't remember his name, but I remember he almost was like a little girl or something in the ring, almost crying. Because I remember Shawn had me in a hold. Both Shawn and me were talking to him.
All right.
It's like, look, okay, like we're panicked, but it's a taped match. We got a million high spots in our heads. I said, it's a taped match. I said, that's no big deal. They fix the rope. We can go right into all the spots. They just cut.
Right.
You know, so he gets the chin lock, and while we have to wait till I said, just fix the rope. And he goes, I can't. And he would not fix the rope. He would not, I said, I begged him. I said, listen to me. It's taped. You can stop everything right now and fix the. And he wouldn't do it. And the whole match was a disaster. We had no top rope for the whole match. I flubbed up all my spots. I got so, we all did. It just turned into a comedy of errors.
Right.
And I remember I was devastated when it was over. I said, I hope it never airs. It was so bad. We were all crushed by it, how bad it was, because we all knew how good we could do.
Right.
We were all had a lot of regard for each other in those days. Rockers were an awesome team. Marty was great. We had that little Saturday night match somewhere. That came, I think, much later. But anyway, so a few weeks later, I kept pleading with him to figure out a way to let us have another match, do it again, or film it in a house show or something. I was just so embarrassed by it. Not so much for my sake, but for everybody's sake, but especially my sake. And then I remember Jim showed up in Milwaukee or something like that with the good news that they weren't splitting us up. We're going to keep the tag belts. And I remember being pretty miffed about it because I thought, well, wait a minute. What was my big push?
Right.
I've been, wait a minute. It's great news for you, Jim. And I remember I went to Vince and he goes, don't worry, it'll happen. It'll happen. It's just, it'll be delayed a little bit. That's all. I said, well, I'll hold you to that. And the one thing about my relationship with Vince, because you asked me about it earlier, my relationship with him in the beginning was I was very intimidated by him. I didn't say a whole lot to him. But once he kept coming up and thanking me for like an awesome match, what a match, this kind of stuff, I finally, in the beginning days, I said, I'd like to move up to the next level all the time. Like, what does it take to get into the better matches and get a figure and he goes, well, you got to work on your mic skills.
That was one of my questions.
And I'd say, okay, well, and then I would come in all the time, every couple of weeks. I said, well, my interviews are better. And he would come up and sometimes he'd say, your interviews were better this week or whatever. But I always made a point of sort of going in his door, in his office and getting a report card. I remember we described it as that's what it is. It's a report card. Give me my report card. And it's like, I got A's, B's, I steadily kept climbing, but I built up a rapport of, and often in matches, I remember the Saturday night main event, me and Randy had worked out a really good match. A really good match. I wish we could have done that one sometimes. And the one we had was good. But Vince goes, no, this is how it's got to be. You got to hurt Randy's foot. He's got to have a bad ankle. And it was like, well, we're up in like 15 minutes. How do we change? He goes, I don't know. And he looked at me and goes, you're the great worker. You fix it. And I took that as a big compliment at that time. And it was a good match. And I never worked the leg for a long time. That was one of the first times I ever worked the leg, making it up as I went along.
Right.
So where was I?
Well, we're leading to your big. Well, actually, you and Jim did eventually break up.
Yeah, so we kept the belts for a little while, and almost like I wanted to get them off. I wanted to get this big push we were talking about before it fades.
Right.
And I was getting a lot. I was over pretty strong. The glasses and that look with the jackets and all that stuff with Neidhart. And me and Jim have been together 6 years at that point. We'd kind of done our thing. I never thought that we would never team up again. I never saw what. I couldn't foresee at that time what was really down the road for me. But I did want to try singles and see what I could do and see, I saw everybody else making money, like Henning and different guys. I thought, I can do this. I can do this. Have that same spot. So we had to drop the belts to the Nasty Boys, which was fine. I was, happy about it. They were a little stiff, Brian and Jerry. But the match we had at WrestleMania was one of the best matches, one of the best tag matches we ever had on film. Like, what a great match with timing and Jimmy Hart, and the way it was done was very credible. Poor what's that? Macaulay Culkin.
Oh yeah, Macaulay Culkin. Yeah.
He's in the audience, and I could tell. I know that he was upset when we lost the match, which is so funny, because he was just a little kid then. But, and I remember the very next night, because I was smart enough to know what was going on. Bulldog had just come back in. I had nothing to do with him, but I knew I knew the business by that time. And immediately they came up and said, we're going to stick you with Henning.
Right, it was 91 around this time.
And I said, so what are we going to, like, you've been promising me the big push. So what are we doing? Like, he just got the belt. So what's the finish going to be? They go, oh, we'll figure. I said, no. I said, wait a minute. I said, I'm not, you guys have asked me to be patient, and I've waited. Now you're going to put me with Kurt and I'm not going to win. I said, I don't even want to do it. And I stood my ground, and I really was pretty firm about it in a nice way. They said, I don't want to do it. And finally they said, okay. And I remember Vince was like, matter of fact, like, all right, throw Bulldog in. So Bulldog worked with Kurt instead almost all summer long. And just like I thought, after that one kind of wore itself out and Kurt had the belt long enough, I think he started to get hurt.
Right, his back.
But before he got hurt, I was winning the belt from him. And then he hurt his back. And it was almost the same kind of thing. I didn't know for sure if he'd make it. And then same thing, he showed a lot of respect and that old intestinal fortitude kind of thing. But he did. He showed up and was in a lot of pain. Kurt was in a lot of pain. And he showed up and put me over just out of respect for me, which I've always been really grateful for. The match itself wasn't as good a match as some of the ones we had in house shows.
You're speaking of SummerSlam.
Yeah. But it was a great match, especially when you look at how Kurt had been off for such a long time and what a great job he really did and how hard he really worked. It stands out as one of my favorite matches of all time, especially in light of the fact that Kurt was hurt as bad as he was.
What are some of your memories of your matches with Jacques Rougeau? I guess Jacques being the man.
You know what? I was probably critical of Jacques sometimes, for being, just some things, But the truth was he was easy to work with. He was more like honky tonk,
right?
You weren't getting that solid kind of match. And in a lot of ways, he kind of got kind of a little lazy. But at the same time, he had a lot of heat. People hated him. And he was a night off, every night. And I don't remember ever not getting a reaction. We always had they always wanted to kill him kind of thing. And I had a lot of heat. And everybody zapped me with it.
Right.
All that was, like in light of how the business is now, I've always reflected fondly on that time with Jock. Maybe not so much in those days. I always liked Jock, but I don't know if I really loved working with him. But it's funny, I remember doing a 6-man with me and the Bushwhackers against Jock and the Nasty Boys, we tore the house down with that silly match. Me doing the Bushwhacker thing. I remember it was so funny to people to see in a different, take a little bit of your edge off, But I liked that time.
Right. And then I guess he lost the belt to Piper.
Lost it to Piper, which is all pretty sudden. I didn't know. I thought something was up, and I was just suspicious of where that was going and waiting for, but we put it on Piper, and then something else happens. Like, well, we were going to put it back on you, but So I was very dubious of, I would say Roddy, because I always liked Roddy, but I just thought something was up and that I was going to get left out in the cold. But I never did.
Right.
And the match I had with Roddy, I always liked about it the most, because this was a guy that was, quite a legend kind of thing in the business. You couldn't really tell him what to do or anything like that. You could. I mean, we were really close friends, but it's like if Roddy came up to me and just say, hypothetically, laid out a really crappy match for me, how do you go about going, how about this instead? Or because I was always revered for coming up with my own strategies and stuff. And usually we're really, really good psychology. And so I remember when I finally sat down with Roddy, I was uneasy about where the match was going to go. It was somewhere in New Brunswick or something like that. We had a little restaurant about 2 weeks before WrestleMania. It was one of the times I saw him. And we sat down and said, this is how I think the match should go. And he laid it out to me. I said, that's exactly how I see the match going. It was almost identical. We were so on the same page as to the strategy and the blood and the whole thing, which, now that I can maybe speak for that was it was planned.
Right.
And it was done well and professionally and made the match. And it was a gamble to do it in those days. There was a lot of heat for that kind of stuff. If you give you an idea of the difference between Randy and Flair went on after us, and Flair was doing doing this all night. They fined him for it big time. He got fined like $5,000 or something for it. I don't know, because they told you were in those days, you weren't allowed to do anything like that. It was still kiddie television kind of thing. Whereas in my match, they didn't even question it. They did, but they believed it because they thought it was hard way, which is, I was a little more professionally. I did it more professionally than most guys.
Right. What are your memories of your match? I guess after the Piper match, you went on and you had an incredible match in Wembley with Davey Boy.
Well, the Piper match was like, I started to have these really good pay-per-views. The one with Hennig, the one with Piper, and in winning that match with Piper, when Vince had laid out the storyline, he goes, "I'm probably going to have you drop the belt to Shawn at probably SummerSlam." Thinking of putting the belt on Shawn Michaels, and asked me if I had a problem with that. I said, "No, I don't," which I didn't. Happy to do that. So I know it went through like till September, and it was up in the air about where the pay-per-view was going to be. It was either going to be in Washington, D.C., or it was going to be in England.
Right.
And I remember I went to Vince with two scenarios. I said, "I have an idea for you." I said, and I made it very clear to him that I didn't want to affect things with Shawn. I knew Shawn was the expected guy to get the belt here.
Right.
I wasn't trying to pull strings or anything like that, or play favorites or anything. But I said, I have two ideas that maybe you could use. And I think it was one of the few.
Is that tape?
No, it's 13.
Oh, okay.
It was one of the few guys to ever, I think, come to Vince with the idea. One of the rare guys, anyways, that comes to Vince about dropping a title for somebody else. The whole scenario I laid out I had nothing to gain in it, other than the artistic creativity of putting two great concepts together. You can pick which one you want. I said I could wrestle Bulldog in a babyface match in London. They'll tear the house down. I said it'll be the greatest match they ever had, and put them over. And I said I can guarantee you that nobody will ever top it. And he goes, "Are you positive that?" And I said, "I'm positive." He goes, "What's your other idea?" I said, "Well, there's this crazy match I've been trying to push on you for years, the ladder match. I've been trying to get you to look at it. If you just look at it one time, you can see what the concept is. It's a great match for suspense." And I said, "I think I could do that with Shawn if you want to. And that's how I could drop the belt to him if you do it in Washington."
Right.
I said, "But I think that's the way." It was just ideas. And he goes, "I've never seen one." I told him a little bit about the match.
You did one at the house show, right, with Shawn?
Yeah, well, that was the whole thing. I said, I told him before I even told him the idea, just so you know, I said, "I'll tell you this idea under the promise that you promise me you'll never do it with anyone else." He goes, "I promise." So I told him the idea for the ladder match. It was another lie that Vince McMahon was part of. But so he said, "Okay, I want you," and I remember that night he said, "I want to see a ladder match, and I want to see it in Maine somewhere, Portland, Maine, just to try out." I remember telling Shawn, trying to explain it to Shawn. Shawn had no idea what to do. We went in there I just wanted to show, it was just the match that's on the tape. If it's out there at all, I think it's on a video somewhere.
Yeah, it's on commercial tape.
But the thing about it was just a demonstration. We weren't trying, it was like a TV taping.
Right.
We were just trying to give you an idea what the match is. We weren't trying to kill each other or have this this unbelievable match. It was just a demonstration of see if you like the idea. So I always felt bad for me, that was my match. And I let Scott and Shawn, talk about it like it was their baby. That was ripped off big time. It was not fair that they gave my idea to two other guys that never appreciated it and never failed to mention it quite often. That it was never their idea and that they ripped it off. But anyway, so he said Wembley was the thing. That it was going to be me and Bulldog. Bulldog, unfortunately, sat home all summer. Partied a lot. Didn't train. And showed up in Wembley kind of overweight, out of shape, and totally paranoid, nervous about the big moment. I guess he thought he was going to be the next Warrior kind of thing. And I don't blame him for thinking that. I mean, he just got himself in that mindset, which is what you sort of have to do sometimes. But I remember the first part of all I did every night, I trained for this match. I put so much into the match. I think that's why it's always been my favorite. I was so determined to have the best match babyface match and show everybody what a babyface match could mean, what you could do with it. The first 30 seconds of the match, Davey went blank. So I think I had him in a rear chin lock. He goes, I'm blank. I lost. And he almost panicked, which is another reason I always talked about how sometimes me blowing my own horn about how good I am. I carried Davey for like 37 minutes. He was so blown up he could barely, in the first 10 minutes, if you watch how blown up he is.
Right.
If you watch the last 3 minutes, he's not blown up anymore. That's how I worked with him. He picked me up for a slam. I jumped up all on my own. I did all the work. I worked twice as hard for both of us. I worked like you could double the 37 minutes. Davey was he was spent in the first 3-4 minutes of that match, and it's one of the only matches where you see me talk. Where I get cut, you can bust me out. To me, you're not a good worker if they can bust you for talking.
Right.
You know, even my brother Owen, I used to catch him talking all the time. Some guys talk. To me, if they catch you talking, that's like a really bad no-no as a worker.
Right.
That's one of the only matches where you could catch me a couple of times, you know, literally calling the spots that Davey forgot all of them. But it was one of my best matches. The drama, the emotion, you could tell. I think that was also what made me. I knew that match, there would be an outpour, an outcry of sympathy that people, because I was really over in England, really, really over, and Bulldog was over. But to be really honest, I was more over in England than he was, and that's the truth. And he was really over a lot. But I think when he walked out, when I walked out, they had to cheer for the English guy, and they felt bad after when I lost. Right. And it was like, geez, you know, like we really wanted the other guy to win, and it was. I think that sentiment went everywhere. And that match is what made me. That was the match that the defining pinnacle start of my rise to being the best worker maybe in the business at that time. I think that's what I was. And I think I remember Flair and Randy Savage watched it, when we got back from the pay-per-view. We watched it in a hotel room. And I'll never forget that they both came to my room and pounded on my door and shook my hand. So that's the greatest match we've ever seen. I don't know. Something happened with Rick and Randy and Madison Saturday Night Main Event in Hershey, Pennsylvania. Vince wanted something specific done, and Rick made it up as he went along in the ring or something. They changed it. They came back and Vince flipped and made him go out and do the whole match over again.
Right.
But somewhere out of that, Vince seemed to lose his confidence in Rick. I don't know what happened there. All I know is that I showed up in Saskatoon. I heard it talk to me. They talked to me about it a little bit in Winnipeg a couple of weeks before I won the title. I went over to Europe from Winnipeg. We did the TV tapings up in Canada here. But I know one of the agents pulled me aside and said they're talking about putting the belt on. They got 4 names on a piece of paper. One was Backlund, funny enough. One was Savage.
Right.
One was me and somebody else. He goes, I think they're going to put the belt on you. He goes, it's just a feeling. But I blew it off. I didn't think it could ever happen. And we went over to Europe where I worked with Flair every night, had unbelievable matches with Flair in Europe. Came back within a couple of days of that. They had me fly out to Saskatoon. And I think that's one of the big things that was a part of my success of being the champion. Or at least not success, but the reason I got it. I think I won it. I found out the morning of and won it that night. A lot of guys, it's like, okay, you're going to win the belt in, the Royal Rumble, and it's like 3 months earlier. You know, there was no time to shoot me down. People that stab me in the back and say I'm a shitty worker, or you can't draw money, or you can't do this, or you can't do that. It's like I just walked in one day and was world champion that night, and it was very sudden. My understanding of Flair was totally fine with it. Never had any problem with it. Always was really respectful of me. I had some problems with Rick in the ring. Sometimes I don't know if they were intentional. I remember Rick did come up to me at one time and said that he was having a lot of problems, and that he apologized for not giving me the matches that he knew that we could have. So I think that sort of substantiates what I was feeling a little bit like.
I remember reading in sheets you would say that Rick was overrated and stuff.
Well, And I think sometimes that he was, but I also think he had a lot of other. He was from a different era, slightly, and there was a different train of thought that went into his being champion that went into mine. Rick was a guy that worked really, 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 really hard. Maybe the most fit wrestler that I ever worked with. Never got tired. He could wrestle. Ric Flair could wrestle 12 hours. I never get tired. But I used to always refer sometimes to Rick as 30 minutes of non-stop non-psychology.
Right.
And Randy Savage used to get a laugh out of it because it was it was almost like kidding, but it was true. You never knew what you were going to do. Sometimes he throw you right in the middle of like working your leg. You throw you the turnbuckle and you just did stuff like, geez, I'm supposed to be selling my leg. Sometimes right when we had him built up like an orchestra, you can feel it when it's like built just perfect, and then we'd lose it all and do something else. Like we'd switch, and all of a sudden I'd be working his arm or something. I think maybe it's just a different way of looking at the business. But I started to sense like whenever Rick just did whatever came into his mind a second before he did it. I think he still works like that. There's not necessarily anything wrong with it, just different. I kind of respect Rick a little differently since then. But at that time, I just wanted to always have a different. I didn't want people to be able to figure out what you were going to do next all the time, and it got to be a little bit like a routine with Rick. But Rick was. If you want to watch somebody that could work, like you watch Rick work somebody's leg or work in your leg.
Right.
He was always safe. He was always a total professional in there. And if you want to know how to put a figure four, and you watch Ric Flair. If you want to watch somebody work an arm, you watch Ric Flair. Everything he did was really solid and safe and believable, incredible. It was a great champion. There was nothing wrong with Rick.
Right. And then I guess it was later on you won the King of the Ring tournament in '93. And
I won the title. Went through the whole thing with. A lot of stuff happened in between that.
Right.
Even before that, you're talking. I won the title. I worked with Shawn in the Survivor Series. I worked with Razor Ramon in the Royal Rumble when he was still really green, and a lot of guys didn't. It was a guy you could put all your faith in as far as work wise. He was limited a little bit. He was becoming a good worker, and I think in time, Razor was a great worker. He always was disappointed with the match that he had with me in the Rumble because I called everything, and I had no choice to call anything because I didn't call everything because I didn't know what kind of worker he was yet. We hadn't had enough matches, and he was still really green. But the match was pretty good, the Rumble. I was trying really hard to give it like that epic, best match of the card kind of thing. And it's not easy with a guy like, it wasn't easy with Scott Hall at that time. And he just wasn't as good as he was going to become.
What's your opinion of him now as far as, are you shocked he still has a job with WCW after everything that's happened?
Nah, nothing in wrestling shocks me much anymore. I don't mind Scott. I kind of feel sorry for him sometimes because there's a part of me that goes, he's a really good guy inside, and there's another part of me that goes, he's really messed up inside. It's almost like a bad kid or something. It's like I've been around Scott where he purposely interrupts the conversation all the time so that he can't finish the sentence to the point you just get up and leave. It's like, and it's kind of, when you're around him in the right, it's just him and you kind of thing. He's a good guy.
Right.
I think it's more of I have sort of a sadness for him. I hope that he's kind of sorts himself out. I think he's capable of. He's not a stupid guy. He's just a fairly intelligent guy with, just the business does things to you.
With the Jerry Lawler feud, was it hard getting your family involved, and whose idea was that?
Well, I was supposed to work with Hogan. And then Hogan, we had our little disagreement. I think that there was a lot of what I went through years later is the same thing that Hogan was going through then. They were telling me one thing.
Was Vince playing you guys off against each other?
Yeah, I think for sure they were playing us against each other. He told me flat out that Hogan said that I wasn't in his league, that it wasn't big enough to work with him, and let alone put me over. But I wasn't big enough to work with him. Didn't have a big enough name. Said all these kind of things where I got pretty steamed about it. And I think we were totally played off against each other. And I think Hogan was probably leaving there trying to just get out of there without having them trash and ruin him too much. So one thing about Hogan's one of the only guys that they never did that to. They could never really destroy him. So a lot of heat between us was built out of ghosts and phantoms. And from that point, it was like the backup plan. Well, you're not winning the title. Hogan's not going to drop the belt to you, so we'll put it on Yoko. And I'm thinking, like, in those days when they put the belt on somebody else, it was like that was the big money position. And the big money position's being handed over to somebody else on account of this guy not wanting to do it.
Right.
And it's like it really bothered me. I thought, this isn't fair. I earned it, and this was the direction that we were going to go. And I thought it was maybe at that time the star of the company kind of thing. And they promised me when I won the belt they were going to keep it on me for a long time. I think they'd help everybody out. So Lawler was a big disappointment for me. I just was really disappointed. Once you kind of, you just get knocked off your horse, you get back on again. I just kind of said, all right. And it wasn't personal slight on Jerry or anything, but I just was disappointed about the way they'd gone. I was happy with the 3 matches I had in the King of the Ring. I thought that was one of my finest nights. All 3 matches were, by those standards anyway, were pretty realistic, and they were all different. It wasn't like the same match in all 3. They were all different. All 3 guys did a lot for me that night. But Lawler stiffed the shit out of me with that, whatever it is, that
Scepter.
That scepter,
Right.
yeah. He really potatoed the shit out of me. I thought he broke my back. I was so mad. I thought I'll fix him when I see him, kind of thing.
All right.
Yeah, so I remembered that for a long time. It was one of the worst potatoes I ever got. So then I actually, then you get where you forget it, you forgive it. It's just one of those things that, I worked with him, and then I ended up doing the thing with Doink,
Right.
which was a nice little twist, but it meant I had to work twice. And it was a nice little twist for everybody. But I worked with Doink, put him in the sharpshooter, and Lawler came up from behind. And if you ever watch, I thought he scarred my face. He whipped me with a crutch like a golf club, swung it like a golf club, whacked me in the face, snapped all the way around, and almost cut my face. You could feel my skin almost get sliced. And it really hurt big time. And so, of course, when they brought him back, if you ever want to see some good punches, every single one of my punches was a dead right on, was like the real punch.
Right.
I was so pissed off at Jerry. And I don't think he ever knew. I think he just thought I was basically a lot, that's how the Hart boys work or something.
Right.
I don't know, but I was pretty steamed. And then I calmed down. And then when I put him in the sharpshooter, I said, when I put him in, he's going to resist right away. I said, so I'll put it on nice and easy. And then I went to a nice, big, long, deep squat, and I put that thing on like you'd never.
Right.
He was giving me the office. I put it on for, I think, 5 straight minutes, which is really hard after working 2 matches. And he literally crawled to the dressing room. He crawled around on the floor in the back. He was in a lot of pain. That was for the 2 spuds that he gave me. But in fact, Jerry was a lot of fun to work with. Once we got past those kind of things, his potatoes and my receipts, I guess.
Right.
I always liked him, and then once we started working house shows and kind of got an idea of what we really were doing, he was always a night off, always had a ton of heat, and it was always like, I can remember walking in the dressing room and see Jerry Lawler's name, and I was like, great, it's going to be easy, it's choking me with this train,
Right.
the popsicle stick, and getting on some little old lady, and then, it was always easy. It was always easy and always had a lot of heat. And I was just looking at it from an entertainment standpoint. Jerry Lawler was always extremely entertaining to watch. So I enjoyed Jerry.
And eventually, Owen was brought into the feud.
Then it was in that period of time that they came to me with the idea of working. As I remember, I think I finally kind of got over an obstacle or hurdle in my contract. And I believe that's when I had the right to my name, which I finally had negotiated. I basically was going to quit over it if I didn't have the rights to my name. They gave me that. And I got a lot of coaching from some of the older guys, like Piper was a big influence on me, telling me, like, this is what you got to do next. You got to own your name, because if you ever leave, you got but shit.
Right.
Little tiny things, and I played my cards real carefully because in those days it was like playing with a big lion that can catch you anytime he wants to, and I unfortunately did kind of go through that with him, but I was kind of just wanting to always protect myself, and did get the rights to my name, and they gave me that, and then one of the things they talked to me about after we kind of got all that smoothed out was his angle of working with my brother Bruce. It was actually supposed to be. And of course I shot that down for all the right reasons. Bruce was nowhere near the worker that Owen was. He was out of shape and kind of had retired and whatnot. He had just had reconstructive knee surgery or something. There was no way he could work. And at that time, Owen was just getting ready to quit and become a fireman. And Owen was going to be cannon fodder for Bruce in this angle. And I said, whoa. I said, I could never do that to Owen. I said, this guy's such a great worker, and he was such a great worker at that time. And even years before when he worked Stampede, Owen was an awesome worker. And he was, one of the things I always loved about Owen was he was nothing like me. You know, when you watched Owen, you didn't go, he's trying to copy his brother, you know. Owen had a distinct, different way of doing everything that I did. He did a lot of high flying, a lot of different stuff. The only thing I think he did, and he didn't do it as well, but he did the front turnbuckles. That's about the only thing he ever borrowed from me.
Right.
Everything else was different. You know, he was a completely different wrestler than me, and that says a lot. He never copied or patterned himself off me at all. But I insisted that it was Owen. If I was going to do it at all, it would be with Owen, and I'd think about it. But I was personally not for it. I told Owen about it and told him to think about it. And I said, I personally don't think I want to do that, and was prepared to say no and try something, think about something else. And Owen came back and asked me to reconsider, and basically said this would be really good for him. And we made a promise that we would make friends somewhere down the line. And I said, we do this, we do it for a long time. I know this like you're a baby face in a few months from now. So you're starting on this like maybe 5, 6, 7 years from now, we'll finally patch things up and make a big thing of it. And we did luckily get to do that. The first few matches I had with him, he was always a little nervous at that time. His interviews were really good. His interviews were exceptional for a guy that was just being thrust right into a pretty big spot. And remember, we worked just before WrestleMania. We had a couple like tag house show matches, in, like Wisconsin and stuff like that. And we had such crappy matches. I mean, everything we did just didn't work and didn't fly right. We tried a lot of different ideas, sort of novel stuff that we were hoping might kind of blow everyone's mind. And we kind of chucked the whole thing out about 4 or 5 days before WrestleMania for the day. And it was like we came up here to the house and we went downstairs and I said, okay, let's forget everything we've been trying to do and like redo the whole match and just look at it from a completely different perspective. And it was very important to make sure Owen stayed heel, which is why he was such a nasty shit in that match. You know, He was really like did everything from 2 or 3 nut shots. He suckered me everywhere he could. But there was a reason. I said, we got to make sure you're the heel. If big brother beating up on a little brother, doesn't take, I've been around a little bit now, it doesn't take much to turn the tide. If you don't plan this out right, you could be being cheered all the way through this thing, and then there goes your heel push. Like both got shit after that. And so we really put a lot of thought into it, and I thought it was an awesome match. The finish, I could have done a bit better victory roll and all that, but the truth was, in those days, it was a pay-per-view. You had so much pressure on you. If you just did it rather than, you couldn't screw up on a pay-per-view. And so we did it very, because my knees were always bad. I couldn't jump as high as I wanted to. But the finish was awesome. The match was really good, and I think that was the start of Owen's. He got respect after that, which he always deserved. And the matches I had with him were every night were a total work. They were so fun to have. He was always fun to work with. And it went on forever. I mean, it seemed like we wrestled for a year and a half.
Right.
And it was kind of a sad day when we finally said this. I think this is our last match. He was going to go into tags with Yoko or something like that. But he was a pleasure to work with. And I'm trying to think who I worked with when we did after Owen. Did I go right into, did I go with Taker?
Well, no, that 95,
Backlund, right?
Well, yeah, the Backlund thing too.
Yeah, the Backlund thing. I first, which is, this is where Shawn could have taken some pages out of my book. Sometimes all you have to do is hold the door sometimes. It's not that hard to do. I wasn't too, I remember they first came to me with the idea of dropping the belt to Bob Backlund. I was like, are you kidding me? Like, you're joking, right? Like, just Bob Backlund? Like, forget it. Like, that's the dumbest idea I've ever heard. And they went into the history of how he lost the belt, and they kind of explained the story. And I remember I was really kind of like, just thought it was such a shitty way to lose the title to Bob Backlund. And then I thought about it, and the more I thought about it, I said, here's a guy was a great worker, great wrestler, great guy. He has this break in near the end of his career, or like a restart at a time when he never thought he'd get it. And I was thinking, if I was Bob, this would, like, when somebody lays this out to you and says, this is what we have in mind, it'd be such a great thing for him. And I remember I completely switched on it. I came right around full circle, and I said, I'd be happy to do this for Bob Backlund. I remember Bob Backlund, when he was in Japan, he always bought a couple of cases of beer for all the young guys and stuff like that. He was a total class act, one of the most honest guys that you could ever meet in the business. One of the nicest guys you could ever remember. He gave me a birthday card, stuff like that. He was just such a nice guy. And you go, of course I'd do it. I'd do it. And I went out of my way to not only give Bob the best match I could, to make it as good as I could. I actually enjoyed every bit of it. And at the same time, you understand this business, knowing that I'm going to lose that top spot again. I'm going to lose that top pay.
Right.
And of course, then it turns out that he dropped the belt to Kevin, which was, I think, disappointing a little bit, because I think actually Bob might have been able to run with it for a little bit. And I think Kevin was a little premature, if you want my honest opinion. He was going to get this push that he needed 6 months later rather than 6 months earlier. And I think things would have been different for Kevin. He was just starting to climb, Kevin Nash at that time, Diesel. But, so then I went into Diesel.
95. I think.
I'd worked with Kevin in the King of the Ring before I worked with Backlund. And I think brought a lot out of him. Like, you can see a huge, huge improvement from Kevin Nash the time I worked with him. You watch when I worked with him, and then you watch when he worked with me the next time, and you tell me you didn't learn. And he learned that from me. I think a lot of it from me. And I was the guy that taught him psychology and taught him how to pace yourself for a match, and how to build the lefts and the rights, and how to swerve everybody just a little bit here and then come back over here. And I brought a lot of Kevin's best qualities out. And I remember he called me up before we had the King of the Ring, or the Royal Rumble match in Florida somewhere.
Right.
He was bombing as champion, and mostly on account of the fact that him and Bob didn't have a good chemistry. And I remember I told him, I said, don't worry, just trust me, and I will make sure that you don't fall any further than you already have, because he was plummeting kind of as champion. And I think it shows a lot for what kind of a character I was in the ring with Kevin Nash, because I did like Kevin, and I had respect for Kevin. I actually wanted Kevin to get over. I didn't have a problem with Kevin. And I went into that match and did everything possible to make sure that he didn't lose any of his babyface edge,
right.
To make sure he never looked too weak, and at the same time make it look like a real contest. All I know is, like, I always use this parallel when I was talking about Bad News Allen or Bad News Brown. If you were an 8 going in the ring against Bad News Allen, and by the time you came back to the dressing room, you were a 2. Whereas when Kevin Nash worked with me in every match, but in particular that one, he was about a 3. And when the match was over, he was like a 6. He was over a little better than he was, and it was like a stopgap for him. And then I can't remember what happened to Kevin after that. He dropped the belt to Shawn, didn't he? Or no, maybe he worked with Shawn. Shawn worked with him at the WrestleMania. Of course, that's when I worked with Bob again in the I Quit match, which was a disaster. I think my worst pay-per-view I ever had. It wasn't Bob's fault. It was just a poor concept.
Right.
They with Piper and the mic and all that was awful. Of course, Bob never quit. He said uncle or something else. Right. I can't remember, but I know that in the match with Kevin Nash and Shawn, they did exactly what I was talking about with Owen, that we had to make sure we didn't do. And Shawn, I think, did it on purpose, turned himself babyface and turned Kevin heel. at a time when Kevin was really important to his survival as champion, to not allow that to happen. And he put his trust in Shawn, and Shawn, I think, buried him and made him kill him as a babyface. And that was the end of Kevin as champion. And I don't really know what happened, who got the belt. I guess I got it from Kevin.
You beat Kevin at Survivor Series.
So I came all the way around. When I took time off through Lonesome Dove, I guess, something like that. I had some great matches with Hikushi and Lawler, the Suck My Toe match or whatever it was.
Right.
But I enjoyed the matches, funny enough. They were always kind of like, I don't know if it was Pierre Lafitte or somebody like that too. They were throwing me all these grounders. You know, it's like, and actually, in fact, they were never grounders, but they were guys that weren't being pushed and weren't being appreciated. Like Pierre Lafitte worked his ass off for me, gave me 2 really good matches, the pay-per-view and the next night on Raw. I worked with Hikushi, who was the guy that everyone was eating up, who was just such a nice guy and could do all kinds of stuff if you just tried a little bit for him. And I always loved the matches I did with Hikushi. He did a couple of things that were unbelievable. But then anyway, all I remember is I ran an idea by Vince about I was trying to get Kevin over more. And I said, I think I could come back and do a babyface match with him. And at that time I was watching Sabu and all these guys go crashing through these tables all the time. And I still watch it. And I go, why would anyone go through the table? Like, it never makes any sense. They put the table out and they straighten it out and set it on the floor, and then they climb up and they do a backflip into it. It's like, it defies logic. It doesn't. It's a great spot, I guess, if you want to hurt yourself or you want to see somebody hurt himself. But as to why you would do it, it makes no sense. Never did, or at least the few times I ever saw it, I always felt sorry for Sabu doing it because it never had any reasoning behind it. And I thought about it. I said, if I was going to go through a crash into a table, I'd make everyone never see it coming, and I'd make it be so important. I'd make it big. I think that's such a pivotal part of the match. And I thought about it. I said, it'd be great if Kevin was pull me up and I went for a small pack and I'll beat him like on a fluke and I'm out cold kind of thing. And then he waits to get me, and then maybe when we finally work, I drop the belt back to him, because that's how I always worked. Whenever I was going to beat somebody, it was always the idea of returning it, giving the belt back, which is the same thing I had with Shawn. And so that's what I thought. So I'll drop the belt back to Kevin at the WrestleMania. And of course, Vince calls me about 2 days after I give him the idea, and it's like it's his idea. It becomes not my idea anymore. And he goes, I got this idea where you do that thing with the table and you win the title, and then you drop it to Shawn at WrestleMania. So that's when the end of Kevin, like they were pulling the plug on Kevin as champion, which I saw. Kevin got the plug pulled on him. Lex got the plug pulled on him. There was a lot of guys that were always trying to build to surpass me or to create. They're always trying to get me out of the way, but for some reason I always kept rising above everybody.
Right.
And I think it's just because I outworked everybody. I worked hard. And Shawn was just starting to come up. Shawn was always a really good athlete and always a pretty good worker. And maybe was starting to become maybe in his best form that he's ever been in. I never had any problem with putting Shawn over, ever. It's like, and I like Shawn in those days. And I considered Shawn one of my good friends in those days, but and I know he talks about the clique and all that, but there was a clique, and there was a lot of politics going on, and a lot of politics that little group were directing, including I think my title loss in the first place through backlund to Kevin. I think it was all manipulated and controlled by outside forces, which is kind of not the way the business should be run. It's like you do whatever Vince wants to do, and of course Vince has final say, sort of thing. But that's that kind of thing I was talking about, the politics of people backstabbing to get what they want. Luckily, I was champion that time, the first time, without, like, I won it the same day I found out. Because anytime there's any long-range planning, there's so much backstabbing and conniving that you find that big spot. Like Lex never quite got it. Kevin, I think, was just a little too early in his push, to be honest, and never got it. I wasn't ready for it at the time. But the problem I had with Shawn was I just didn't feel that I was a guy to carry the belt to give it to him. Like, I knew that was kind of what was in store for me, but I wanted to be treated with a little respect. And right away, as soon as I won the title, I think a lot of this is always controlled by Vince, so I'm not necessarily targeting Shawn. But from the time I won it, the pay-per-view with the British Bulldog, the Inner House, which I thought was an awesome match, I had to pull all that together. Bulldog was hardly over. They hadn't done anything to get him over. It was almost like they threw me another crappy pitch kind of thing. And luckily for me, I turned it into a really nice, like I hit a home run kind of thing with that match and carried, which was really hard. It's one of my best achievements to pull a match out of Davey as Davey the heel. Now Davey's driving the car technically in the match. And Davey was never as good a heel, to be honest, as he, Davey was a follower in the ring. He was never a leader in the ring. And he couldn't make you. It was the other way around. You had to make Davey all the time. And if you could do that, you could have a great match with him. And we did have a good match. It took kind of pulling out all the stops with the blood and everything, but it was really well done, the match. But the very next night, there was no mention of the match. There was no mention of, I think the day after I won the title from Kevin Nash, actually before the match with Davey, I never even had an interview talking about how I won the title or anything. No, like, welcome to the new champion.
Right.
None of that. It was Shawn got stretchered out with a kick with Owen or something like that, where they pretended he was hurt. He was never really hurt. He had whatever it was, the injury, brain injury that he had. And he got to sit home. He went home through 3 or 4 month vacation, which is, great for him. And he's going to wrestle me at WrestleMania. He's not really even hurt. He's just going to go home and do the stairs, and do upside down sit-ups and all that stuff, and get ready for this hour match. They sent me to Bahrain and India and all over the place. They pounded me to the ground. I worked with Undertaker and Kevin Nash every night. Got jackknifed, powerbombed all over the country. It was hard. I couldn't get ready for the match. Well, how can they expect me to go an hour? And I'm working with 2 heavier guys and big guys that are just throwing, pounding the hell out of me.
Right.
And I could realize that it was designed to make sure that whatever happened in WrestleMania, that I did not get over. It was important that I was sucking wind at the end of the match, that it was the Shawn Michaels show, Shawn, and you could tell the whole time I had the title that I had no push from the office. They cut my power completely. And I even accepted that with a pretty good graces. Just sort of, I didn't understand it, and I thought it was a shitty way to treat me. But I had never had a big problem with it. I think the big problem when I started to see signs of trouble with Shawn, started to get the ego problem. I can remember State College, Pennsylvania, 2 or 3 days before Kevin Nash and Scott Hall switched offices. And it gives you an idea how all of them were so close, because they might not have been that close, because I know that Shawn never knew anything about it. Because he said to me, he goes, you have to understand, whoever the champion is makes the most money.
Right.
And I never ever dictated who I worked with, ever. Even though it's funny, I did work with Owen, Davey, Jim Neidhart, and all. It was never my decision. That was Vince's idea. I never ever singled out any opponents. It was whoever Vince wanted. And I can remember Shawn telling me, he goes, I can't wait to get the belt. He goes, I can't wait. He goes, the guys I think I can draw money with. I think work a program with Kevin. I can draw money with him. I said, I think I can work a program with Hunter. He's coming up, and I can draw some money with him. He goes, I even think I could do a program with the kid. And he goes, and me and Scott Hall can do these ladder matches or something like that. And I remember listening to it, and I go, that's all 4 of his friends. Like, that's a really bad precedent in this business, that you have the main event singling out all his friends, and it's like me and all my friends are going to make all the money around here. And the rest of these guys, like the peons in the dressing room, you're lucky you're on my card kind of thing. And it's like, wait a minute, that's bad business. It's really bad to start that kind of. That's a bad, what do they call it? Anyway, it sets a bad example for the whole business. And which is, you look at the business today. I think the business is in the state it's in, which is like, hey, maybe it's doing great. I don't personally agree that it is, but I think if you that respect and the morality in the dressing room, it was gone from that point on. Because Shawn was a great wrestler, and he could have got all that respect and that everything he ever wanted out of the business just on his ability, and I think everyone understood that. But Shawn was too insecure about his own ability, and always had to stab everyone in the back and play head games and become this unbelievable prima donna in the dressing room, and basically just not be good business. And I saw the first signs of it at that time in State College. I got ready for the match. I did everything possible to be ready for the match. I surprised everybody by being ready for the match. And if you watch the match with Shawn, as great as worker as Shawn is, Shawn sandbagged me a lot of times through the match. If you watch the match back, you can see me numerous times having to pick him up dead weight in the match. If you watch from my end, you never see any of that. Shawn never had to pick me up one time in the whole match. Shawn was the first one to start throwing potatoes in the match. He threw 2 or 3 pretty stiff shots, busted my lip open and stuff. And so then it got, after like 2 or 3 or 4, it got to be like, okay, well, I guess we're gonna throw potatoes back and forth. I never thought the match with Shawn was a great work. The match with Shawn was a great contest. It was 2 guys, one trying to protect his legacy, and another guy trying to diminish mine. And it was a contest to see who could outdo each other for 60 minutes. And it was in a lot of ways, it was a classic Japan kind of match, maybe. I certainly respected him. We mapped out, unbelievable how we mapped out so many different high spots, different things through that whole match. And I remember telling Shawn, I said, how much time do you need in the end for to get all your shit in? Right. Whatever it is. You tell me how long you want, you got it. I'll catch for you for the last, you tell me how long you want. He goes, 4 minutes is all I need. And if you watch that match, we got no clocks. We got no idea how much time's left other than the odd comment from a referee every 10 minutes or something. And there's a certain pivotal point in that match which was the cue. And I think it's exactly 4 minutes left in the match. And it's a credit to Shawn, and it's a credit to me that we planned out 56 minutes the very day of the show, and it was perfect. I know Shawn said something about it. I ducked him and I didn't take his calls or something. But the truth is, that's not true. I mean, I was always aware and prepared. We kind of talked. We really just didn't know how to put it together. And I think I was more into kind of a deep. We blocked off segments. Like, here, you take care of the first 5 minutes because I don't really care. We put a lot of trust in each other. And it was a great match. I've always been proud of it. I thought we could have been more. If he'd just been a better guy, I think through the whole period, we would never. It would have been more of a work instead of a contest. But all in all, it was great. Things that need to be clarified, I think. I don't want to dwell too much on Shawn. But it was all set up for me to leave and exit the business and the building exactly that way. We wanted to give everyone in the dressing room the impression that it was a bit of a shoot. And it was all planned. It was all thought out. Shawn was in on it. I was in on it. Vince was in on it. It was done for a reason. I was not for purpose. I said, well, don't shake your hand. It was mapped out before I ever dropped the title, and it wasn't written in stone or anything because I didn't work like that. But the idea was that I would come back. There might be enough interest if we sensed it was, if the attention was there, that we would work another match, a babyface match, and I would go over. And then I would work with him a third time and put him over again. And then we would shake hands. And then we would do a tag team thing or something like that. And that was what I had laid out. And I threw it out as an idea. When I did drop the belt to Shawn, I didn't have any bad feelings about it at all. I know that 3 weeks after he won the title, the ratings dropped. The first time WCW was beating us in the ratings. And the panic set in because Shawn was over with the girls. But I don't think he was ever over with the male audience, ever. And a lot of people liked him as a worker. And he was certainly not over with the boys. He had a lot of heat with everyone in the dressing room, as did that whole clique. And when the clique left, they left with a lot of heat. Scott, Kevin, left with a lot of animosity. And because just people didn't like the way they did business, I think. And Shawn didn't get over, like he wanted. It had nothing to do with me. But all I saw was an opportunity to come back, and this is what we could do.
You took some time off in between this, right?
Yeah, I took a bunch of time off. I was going to try to do acting. I pursued the acting. When the WCW offer and all that happened, so they were trying to lock everyone into 5-year contracts. And unfortunately, that's what kept my brother Owen, and he did sign a 5-year contract. But when I took the time off, it was a sort of unannounced, surprise, sudden, perfect, time meeting between my manager at the time, looking to make money off me and pull a big deal with WCW, but it had nothing to do with me. I had no idea. And I was actually a little, it's way too premature to have this meeting. I didn't want to have a meeting. And at that time, to be really honest, I had no intention of ever leaving WWF. And I was happy with looking forward to going back if I ever did go back. Actually, I thought I might actually have an acting career still kind of hanging there. And I was glad to have the time off. So I did meet Eric Bischoff. I threw him an outrageous number, and they called me back pretty much to say that it was a possibility. And that started that whole negotiation. But to probably be really, really honest, I negotiated and tried to get as good a deal as I could with the WWF. And most of what I got wasn't a financial deal. It was never a financial deal. What I got from my contract negotiation with Vince was I got total protection that they never just could ruin my character. That I had to have some control over what they were going to do with my character. So a lot of what I did was something that needed to be done for years. I was the first guy to ever finally, and I think that's why I was kind of rubbed out.
Right.
It's because I was the first guy to finally have some kind of rights in the business. I had some say and I had a voice. And I negotiated in good faith with Vince. And he came back and made this offer, and he gave me all these conditions. And he met that offer, and I signed. And I remember even after, if you watch the Survivor Series, when I worked with Austin, which is another important thing you should know, and I'll mention it now, is that Austin had come up and met me in my house and told me that basically said that I had to, we really need you back. We really need you to come back, and you need to get Shawn out of there. Shawn is like bullshit. It's bad business, and he's got a shitty attitude.
That's when basically you were heel, and then you went.
No, that's before.
Right.
I was still babyface.
Right.
So then I came back. I worked Survivor Series with Austin. We had a pretty good match. If you listen to the commentary in that match, that's Madison Square Garden, Jim Ross and Vince buried me all the way through the commentary. I remember I bitched about it to Vince. I go, what are they talking about? That I was too tired and ring rust and all this shit, I hadn't worked in 6 months, and I gave you a better match than most of the guys you got on your card. It was just cheap shots all the way through. And I thought it was personal. I thought it was intended to be personal. And I said, if you have a problem with this deal, if you're not happy with the deal, tell me now. Just say so now, because we don't need to. I came back as a favor to you, kind of thing. And he goes, no, I wouldn't have made the deal if I didn't like the deal. And he didn't apologize, but he said it was a misunderstanding, but that was the first crack, I think. But going back again to Shawn had come up to Calgary that summer, I think before I ever signed. And again, in that meeting with Shawn in the dressing room here in the Saddle Dome, I talked to Shawn again. I said, I just have an idea, and tell me what you think about it. If I come back like I got a bit of a chip on my shoulder that I lost you and all that. I never shook your hand. And I said, we build it up, and finally we have the match. And it would have been, tell me if you like the finish, because it would have been a good finish. We're going to do a match where Shawn finally gets ready for the big kick. And right at the last minute he goes for the kick, I was going to do some kind of move where I catch his foot and I go down. This is when Ultimate Fight Challenge was starting to become pretty prominent. And I was going to do a thing, we even talked about getting a boot made that had almost like a socket wrench kind of thing to it.
Right.
And I was going to snap his ankle. And we even talked about stuff like having something snap under the ring with a sound.
Right.
But I was going to blow his ankle out, completely break his ankle in the middle of the ring. And he taps out. That's how he wasn't going to quit or I give. Or he was going to tap out like the Ultimate Fight guys. And then I get up, and he's selling the shit out of his leg. And I get up, and I don't shake his hand again. I take the belt, and I go back to the dressing room. I said, then he builds, he comes back, takes the time off, comes back, and then he kicks my ass with the big boot, knocks me out. I come up, I shake his hand, and we tag. And was going to build I said, just an idea. He goes, I think it's great. He thought it was a good idea, even though he hated it. See, but Shawn, he didn't want to drop the belt to anybody on the planet. He was never even, this was his moment. He didn't want to ever lose it. And that's where the politics came in. It wasn't, I was being very, if he'd said, look, I don't like it, I don't want to do it, he should have said to me, because then I would have come, I was just suggesting stuff. But he gave me the idea that it's cool, let's run with that. So then when I did come back, Vince promised me that I win the title of WrestleMania from Shawn. I hear all kinds of stuff that he was never asked, or this or that. I don't know what happened. I can't speak for what happened with Shawn and Vince, but I think it goes without saying that there was a lot of politics. I think Vince played us off against each other big time.
Right.
I think Shawn is more guilty of that than me, though. I was more used to it. I never fell for it. I think a lot of guys never fell for it, but Shawn did. A lot of the stuff I said a lot of stuff about his family.
Yeah.
I don't know of anything I ever said about his family, ever. I know I talked about the Playgirl magazine thing was about the only thing I ever said about him. And even that, the very first night I went out and said it might have been the very first night. I think the very first time I did an interview coming back and where I turned down the money and all that. I might have mentioned it about role model or something like that. And it kind of was a shoot interview and kind of a cheap shot. And maybe I was out of line then, but I remember apologizing to him after and he didn't have a problem. And then weeks after, I asked him again. I said, "Should I mention it or should I?" He goes, "Yeah, go ahead." And you can. And it became like he kind of endorsed it. So then I did kind of like, okay, so it's acceptable, or he's going to, it's okay with him to do that. So I did kind of ride the Playgirl magazine thing. But again, I was always working a shoot. That's what I was doing. I was never shooting with him. And if you look at what we could have done big business, I think, based on what I was believing at the time. Shawn wasn't. And then when he pulled up lame at WrestleMania, I didn't know what to make of it. I said, I'll believe if I see him working again a few weeks from now that the whole thing's a bunch of shit.
Right.
I said, if he's hurt and his career is over, and I feel really bad because he's too good a worker. So we kind of questioned the guy's integrity to see what happens in the next 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks, what happens after WrestleMania. Well, just like everybody thought, he surfaced conveniently right after with no injury at all. He I think that's where the heat started with Shawn and me, is because he really, really took offense to me speculating that it wasn't legit. And I wasn't just the only one. Everyone thought it was bullshit what Shawn did. But I think maybe that's where the heat came from, because maybe it was legit. I don't know. But that's where it started. It never started with me talking about his family. That is horse shit. And a lot of what he said is horse shit. And it's just a guy that was on pills that was kind of out of it at the time, that maybe was too stressed. And it was played like a puppet the whole time. And it was, I don't know how, he talks about shaking hands with people and stabbing them in the back minutes later and accuse me of that. That's outrageous for him to even suggest that. It was always the other way around. I don't know how many times I buried the hatchet. Even the thing about me suggesting he wasn't really hurt. I remember he told me with almost tears in his eyes that he was really hurt when I said it. We had a little chat out in the stands about it. And I said, well, it was something I suspected. I said, but if I apologize and let's start over. Let's get back to business. We can draw money with each other. And it was right around there, almost like within like seconds of that or weeks of that, he comes out with the Sunny Day remark. And that was, he talks about it was just childish games and stuff. That is some serious, a lot of wrestlers would shoot you for something like that. And it's totally unfounded. There's probably more truth out there. There's probably more facts out there to base a homosexual relationship with Shawn Michaels and Vince McMahon that would ever tie me in with Sonny, and it's like, but I mean, what you could speculate is like, it doesn't matter anyway. He said, she said, this, that, it doesn't matter to me. There's just nothing to any of that. But and even when it was said to me on TV, it kind of went right over my head. Like it didn't register with me, but it registered with everyone else. I don't know, Owen was pissed off about it. My dad was mad about it. My kids came home from school mad about it. My wife was steaming over it. And I found myself in a situation where, all you had to do, even Jim Ross called me up apologizing, like that's his responsibility. But I think a lot of this was being stirred up, and I don't know, I never had much regard for Jim Ross's integrity either. I think we were played and pushed against each other all the time. And with Shawn, the Sunny Day remark, all would have taken was a little apology of like, look, I got stoned on pills again. He was practical. Shawn was one of those guys like Louis Spicoli that was on, who's next? Who's going to die next? Pillman, Spicoli, Shawn Michaels, Scott Hall, 1, 2, 3 kid, pick, flip a coin, Davey boy. They're all teetering, flirting with death every night. Shawn was a big basket case in those days. I don't think he mentions that in any of his tapes, and it's just the truth. And he was totally out of his gourd, if that's the right word.